Okay, quick review of yesterday. So, there's Kli Rishon, there's Kli Sheni, there's Kli Shlishi, there's pouring from the Kli Rishon into the Kli Sheni. We learned that there's halachically, if something was dry and completely cooked, there's no din of recooking it on Shabbos, so you're allowed to do it because it cannot recook it. If it's liquid and the liquid's cooled off already, then there is a concept of recooking. So you wouldn't be allowed to recook liquid that was already cooked but cooled down, that's not warm anymore, that you wouldn't be allowed. Now yesterday we were discussing also that there is a concept, we'll get back to the ladle in a second. So we learned that even though there's no cooking after cooking by dry things, but there is a concept in halacha called there's cooking after baking, baking after cooking, baking after frying, frying after cooking and baking and roasting. Okay, why? Cooking after cooking, there's no cooking halachically after cooking. I mean, there's no problem with it because you're not doing anything more. You're not changing the texture of the object because it's already cooked. But baking does things that cooking doesn't do, and cooking does things that baking doesn't do. So even though something was already baked, let's say, but if you're going to recook it, so then you are changing the texture of something through heat, and therefore that wouldn't be allowed. So he said, technically, because the Kli Sheni has the ability to cook if it's hot. We're talking the Kli Sheni, the second vessel that's hot, has the ability to cook. We know two things it can't cook: spices and drink, liquids. You can't cook any liquids. Kli Sheni is not hot enough to cook any liquids. Okay? Even if it's hotter than a Kli Rishon that cooled down, but is cooler than the Kli Sheni, like if the Kli Rishon is 150 degrees, it can cook, but a Kli Sheni at 170 degrees can't. We discussed the reason for that is because the Kli Rishon, the pot that's on the fire, the walls of the pot get hot. And because the walls of the pot get hot, it retains the heat enough to cook. Kli Sheni was never on the fire. You're pouring from a pot into the Kli Sheni, so the walls were never hot, so therefore it doesn't have the ability to cook. Okay, that's what?
So is it raw meat and raw salt?
Yeah. Can only cook in a Kli Rishon that's on the fire.
It's off the fire, that means they do?
No. Not in raw meat. Not raw beef and salt. Okay, so now we're discussing this. So practically speaking, what happens if you want to put croutons or crackers or a piece of challah into the soup? Okay? So it says in Shulchan Aruch that if the bowl of soup is a Kli Sheni, so then you're not allowed to put anything baked in it because it might cook it. Now the Rebbe says it's even possibly that is biblically forbidden. But then we were discussing yesterday that the ladle that you take from the pot into the bowl, so many times that ladle could be counted as a Kli Sheni, the second vessel, if you don't keep the ladle in the hot pot of soup the whole time. And then you could take it out, and then the bowl would be considered a Kli Shlishi, according to many opinions. And then, according to those opinions, you would be allowed to put crackers and bread and croutons, it wouldn't be an issue. Okay? But there is one issue that we have to discuss, and that is about a ladle, and for that matter, about a second cup of coffee. Okay, now, you take a soup from the ladle. Okay, with the ladle, you take soup out of the pot, you put it into the bowl. You put down the ladle, and you serve the bowl of soup, right? That's the way you're doing it. By the time you come back, the minimal amount of water in the ladle already cooled down. It's possible. Depends how quick you made it to the table and back and how hot the ladle was. But there's an issue that there might be a little bit of liquid left in the ladle. Now and it cooled down already. So there's cooking after cooking by liquid that cooled down. Now you're going to put these liquid in the ladle back into the kli that's hot. So now the question is, are you cooking the liquid that's in the ladle back when you put it back into the pot? See, when you leave the ladle in the pot the whole time, the water never cools down in the ladle. It's always going to be hot. But the disadvantage of this is it going to be considered cooking the liquid that's in the ladle? So there are opinions that say it's so minimal, whatever is left, it's not a lot of liquid left, it's a drop of liquid, it's not a big deal. Some people say it is, and therefore what some people suggest, you just wipe off the ladle quickly, with a paper towel, whatever, you just wipe the ladle, make sure it's not wet, and then you put it back into the bowl of soup. It's not a big deal. You have one piece of paper towel, you just dry it, it's no big deal. But now you have the same issue. Let's say you had a cup of a tea. Okay, you drink hot tea. Now, it's still wet. Okay, you finish the tea. And now you want to take another cup of tea. So now you're going to pour from the kettle into the glass of tea. Glass of nothing's in except liquid. Because you didn't dry the cup. Right? It's liquid. Now that liquid cooled off. So now the question is, kli sheni cannot cook liquids. But pouring from a kli rishon, from the initial vessel we learned, does cook the outer shell. That means it could cook water. So again, some people say it's no big deal because it's so minimal amount of water. Some people say you should dry the cup, whatever it is, and just making people aware of the issues that come up with all these practical things that nobody even thinks about. That's as far as, now, there's another opinion that holds, and there's even argument amongst Vaad Rabbonim what the Alter Rebbe holds. There's something called Dover Gush. Gush is a solid mass. That's what, to give an example, you can have Cholent. Okay? Sometimes you can have a liquidy Cholent. Sometimes you can have a solid Cholent. Okay? So now the question is, a solid bowl of Cholent, some people hold, because it's things that are liquidy cool off quicker. When you have a solid mass of heat, of a hot Cholent, it doesn't cool off as quick as a liquidy bowl of soup would. So now the question is, this, what's called Dover Gush, in a kli sheni, does it have the ability to cook or not? So what would be the difference? The difference is, I'm not saying you're not allowed to. There are a lot of leniencies, again, when they serve the cholent with the ladle, so the ladle is a kli rishon and a kli sheni, a kli shlishi. Some people hold that Dover Gush is no different than a regular thing. I'm just mentioning, a lot of people, I'm not saying you're not allowed to, okay? Some people like to pour, especially in this shul, they like to pour hot sauce over the cholent. Right? Now, sometimes the cholent is liquidy, sometimes the cholent is not liquidy. So I'm not saying you're not allowed to, I'm making it clear. According to many, many opinions, it's not an issue, you're allowed to do it. But there are, making people aware of something, that there are opinions that hold if it's a solid, massive cholent, even though it's a kli sheni, it's not this, it's hotter than a regular kli sheni. So again, so there are people that hold Dover Gush, doesn't matter, kli shlishi, kli revi, kli chamishi. Okay, yeah.
The cholent here is either kli shlishi or revi.
I'm not saying, again, I'm not talking about the cholent here. I'm talking, the cholent here is above Chilul Shabbos. This cholent can never be desecrated Shabbos with this cholent. It's made very holy and whatever. But again, Dover Gush, a lot of poskim say, even according to the Alter Rebbe, because the Alter Rebbe doesn't mention it too often. The Alter Rebbe mentions it in one place about Dover Gush. And some say that the Alter Rebbe doesn't mean that, and some, Dover Gush doesn't cook, it's not any different than anything else. So those are the various different opinions. But if you see that some people will not pour hot sauce over the cholent, it could be for one or two reasons. Either they don't like it, they don't like the hot sauce to ruin the taste of the cholent, or because they want to be machman, not to pour liquid over something which is a solid mass, because then it might cook it.
Should they stick their finger in and see how hot it is first? It's not that hot.
Yeah, it's a good idea. It's a good idea to stick your finger in, but I suggest when the pot of soup is on the fire, you should stick your finger in also, because then you'll cook your finger. Yeah, then you wouldn't be allowed to eat. You wouldn't be allowed to eat your finger for many reasons. But one reason, because you're cooking in Shabbos. Okay, that's that. Okay.
And fried foods. What do you need to know about fried foods versus baked?
What do you need to know about fried foods? There's, again, in halacha, it's not only in the laws of Shabbos. There's a lot of laws in braches. What bracha do you make on fried food? Okay, now so you have like this. You have cooking is with liquid. Baking is without liquid, but you're not baking it over an open fire. You're baking it in the heat of an oven. Roasting is when you're roasting it dry over a fire. Okay, that's different din completely than baking. Baking is dry, right? Generally speaking, baking is dry, but you're not cooking it over a fire. You're cooking it in the oven from the heat of the oven, but not directly in the fire. Roasting, you make a barbecue, so even a grill is called roasting because the fire is mamish, straight on the fire. And you're not cooking with the heat of, 1 second. Then you have frying. Now frying itself is also an halacha. What's the definition of frying? So Shulchan Aruch, it says, generally frying would be more of a deep fry, would be frying. But sometimes, let's say you want to make a fried egg, right? Whatever. So you're going to put a little oil at the bottom, just that it shouldn't stick. Not because you want to you make the egg in oil. You just put, if it's not a non-stick, right? Okay. Years ago, they didn't have non-sticks. So people would put a little bit of oil or butter or margarine right at the bottom, but they didn't do it to fry it like that. That wouldn't have a din of frying as much as like you do French fries. French fries you do in a deep fryer, right? So that would be fried chicken or fried schnitzel, whatever it is. That would have a din of fried, not baked or things like that. There would be a different din because that's called frying when you're doing it in a lot of oil. The Alter Rebbe says in Shulchan Aruch, putting a little bit of oil at the bottom that it shouldn't stick, that's not called frying. It might be called baking, but
Say you have a bowl of cholent Shabbat's morning, then you get some eggs that was cooked before Shabbat, it's in the refrigerator. You dry out the zundet eggs, and you're arranging the eggs on top of the pot, and then you put some sort of a cover on top to heat it up an hour before lunch.
no, what's that? You want to put the eggs in the chon pot.
On the top of the
While it's on the fire?
Yeah, but while it's on the fire.
while it's on the blech, whether it's directly on or slightly off of the fire.
There's a big. You're talking about a crock pot or a blech,
A blech, you have a regular pot on top,
right?
and then on the top of
Okay, that's not for tonight. That's the next topic. I don't know if we'll get there by tomorrow yet either. In other words, like this. There is a blech. A blech actually means, again, the word blech means a piece of metal. It's a Yiddish word for a piece of metal. Now, in order, sometimes, and that's introductory because it's time for math, sometimes you need a blech to leave food on the stove for Shabbos. Sometimes so that you don't need a blech. Sometimes you do need a blech. And another reason of a blech is if you want to take food off the blech, serve it, and put it back onto the blech, so then you need a blech with 6 conditions need to be met to be able to put it back. In other words, if I have a kettle, an urn, not electric urn, a regular, normal urn that's on the blech, I want to pour a cup of coffee or tea, whatever, right? And I'm taking it off the blech. Now, in order for me to put that shine the kettle back onto the fire, I need 6 conditions. One of them is that you have to have a blech. Even though the water was completely cooked and it's still hot, you still can do it. So, and here in a blech, there's 3 parts of a blech. We'll learn. Stick around.